Okay, here we are then for our 13th session looking at the Gospel of Luke in a series that we've entitled The Saviour of the World. We are listening to the story as God told it through Luke, so that we might better understand the message of the good news that he shares with us and in the way in which he shares it with us. So feel free to ask questions. You can do that in the little chat window, or we'll open things up at the end, just as you wish. So yeah, last week, in our last session, session 12, you may remember that we heard a profound lesson as to what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Before we witnessed one of the most underrated events of human history. We ascended, you may recall, with Peter, John, and James up a mountain with Jesus to pray. And whilst we were there, we saw Jesus talking with Moses and Elijah. Yes, it really did happen. And then you may recall there was a cloud which enveloped them. And then we heard a voice coming out of the clouds saying, "This is my son, my chosen one. Listen to him." There had been a time for the law, a time for the prophets, but now it was time to listen to Jesus, the Son of God, through whom God revealed himself so perfectly. Now, of particular interest to us right now is the subject of the conversation between Jesus and Moses and Elijah. You may recall they spoke of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. The NIV speaks of that, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. And I've also put in the New Living Translation there, because it translates that word more accurately. They were speaking about his exodus from this world, which was about to be fulfilled in Jerusalem. Got a little question here. Is this what it means to be a follower of Jesus? For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life will find it. It's a part of what it is to be a follower of Jesus, certainly. In fact, Jesus, Luke records Jesus using very similar words just a little earlier on. That would have been a couple of weeks ago when we looked at that passage, I believe. Well, as we begin the second half of this extended series of classes on the Gospel of Luke, we're beginning a new major section of the book. Now, this is not particularly obvious from our English versions, as the division comes mid-chapter. Not that Luke included any chapters in his writing, of course, but it occurs mid-chapter at Luke chapter 9 and verse 51. The Nestle-Aland Greek text of Luke indicates the transition with a break in the narrative, but that may not be an awful lot of use for most of us. And generally, the flow of narrative in Luke's gospel is a lot more fluid than within the other three gospels. And so outlines of Luke are generally much less uniform. You know, you go away and outline the Gospel of Luke, and I do the same, and we'll come up with something quite different, because it just tends to flow a lot more smoothly, more fluidly. Is that a good? Well, we'll use that anyway. Than the other three, and maybe that's why I rather like it. It reads in many ways sort of more like a narrative, a story. Now, it might be useful for us to look at the way in which the book is structured at this point, and we'll do that in just a moment because I think it would be useful. But just before we do that, here's a little outline of the session for this evening. We're going to take a little bit of time looking at the book structure because I think that that is useful. Then we will take a look at what is generally often at least referred to as the central section. We'll say something about the cost of following Jesus, and I was going to get into the section looking at sending the 72, but I got a little carried away with the earlier bits. You know, I said I'm not very good at controlling myself with these things, but I do think this is helpful and in understanding the gospel as a whole. We may, then again, we may not get into looking at the sending of the 72, or you may in your version have the sending of the 70, and we'll have something to say about that in due course, I'm quite sure. Luke mentions, just looking at a comment here, Luke mentions Jesus praying and interceding more than indeed. I think we've maybe mentioned before how that Luke has more to say of prayer within his gospel account, within his second volume, the book of Acts, than do the others. And more of that to come probably next week, I'm sure, although it is likely impossible to agree upon any single outline of Luke's gospel. And I mentioned earlier, you know, if I was to go away and you were to go away and write, you know, sort of put together an outline, it's actually, I think at least anyway, and you do with it whatever you will, but I think it's a awfully good practice in our study of Scripture to take any book that we might be looking at, or maybe any extended passage within a book, and to try to come up with our own outline, not simply rely upon that may be provided by any one of a number of commentators. And one of the reasons that I think it's terribly useful to do that is because it makes us understand the text and understand the text within its own literary context. So it's a very useful exercise in Bible study to try to actually outline passages, books, ourselves simply by reading them and reading them again and beginning to see how they fit together. Now, here is a suggested structure. This is not an outline, but a suggested structure of the book. It begins with the infancy narratives, and that essentially takes up the first 2 chapters. Yes, there are other little bits and bobs in there, as we saw all those many weeks ago, but the infancy narratives form that first main section. Then we have what we may call the Galilean narrative, from chapter 3 through to chapter 9 and verse 50. There's a very clear beginning in chapter 3 and verse 1 where we read of the setting of a new historic contexts, beginning in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. Luke is deliberately beginning a new section here and setting it within its historic context. And then the teaching of John is separated from the temptations of Jesus by his genealogy. And so we're essentially given 2 fresh beginnings, if you like. In chapter 4 and verse 1, we're told that Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit in the wilderness for 40 days. Yep, and then that goes into the temptation account. But then we've got another sort of new beginning, if you like, a little later in chapter 4, that he returned in the power of the Spirit to Galilee, and a report about him went out through. So we've got we got the beginning of the section in chapter 3 and verse 1 with the historic setting. Then we've got sort of another beginning in chapter 4, verse 1, and then another beginning in chapter 4:14. So some would argue that the main Galilean narrative doesn't really begin until we get to chapter 4 and verse 14, when Jesus had returned in the power of the Spirit to Galilee. But do with all of that whatever you will. I'm taking it as the main section there from beginning of chapter 3 up until chapter 9 and verse 50, which is where we were last week. So then we come into what is often referred to as the central section of the book. It's referred to in other ways, but there is here, there is here potentially a geographic shift at this point, with Jesus and his disciples leaving Galilee and entering Samaria on their way to Jerusalem. I'm just thinking this would probably have been a good time to put a good place to put a map, wouldn't it? But I'm guessing that most of us are probably familiar. If not, that's why you may have maps at the back of your Bible, and you'll find Galilee there in the north when we look at this whole area of Palestine. Jerusalem is a lot further south, and in between we've got that place called Samaria, which many Jews would seek to avoid at all cost, for sake of being contaminated. More of that maybe some other time. But yeah, so we've got here this potential geographic shift, and some have seen this whole section as being a travel narrative, being a journey from Galilee all the way down to Jerusalem. But the thing is, the whole central section has very few geographic references, certainly compared with what we have seen earlier. Very few place names, very few records of particular movements of Jesus and the disciples, and these don't really return until we come to the final section where we arrive at Jerusalem. So those kind of details are really missing from this central section. So it certainly isn't really any sort of travel journal, if you like. And technically, we don't finally leave Galilee until we come to chapter 17 and verse 11, as we will see. So, you know, in this section, even though Jesus is going down into Samaria, he's going to go back up into Galilee, and then it's going to be a little bit of a mishmash as far as his travels are concerned. But Jerusalem is going to be consistently seen as the final destination. So that's important to bear in mind. Come back to that in a little moment. But there's also in this section a considerable amount of material to be found only in Luke's gospel, and some of it only in Luke and Matthew. I don't know whether you've ever tried to put together what some refer to as a harmony of the Gospels, you know, where you might line up Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and then you see how they fit together. And if ever you've tried to come up with some sort of a chronology of the life of Jesus, well, before too long, you'll be pulling out your hair. And by the look of it, one or two of you might have tried that. Okay, so it's pretty much an impossible thing to do. You know, it's I mean, there are some things that obviously come before other things. We get that, but it's really tricky, to say the very least. There was a very early attempt of putting together a harmony of the gospel by a chap called Tatian there in the 2nd century, and he came up with a document that was known as the Diatessaron, which literally means the sort of the harmony of four. In more recent times, some of you may know of Legard Smith. He put together what I think was originally called the Narrated Bible. Then it became more popularly known as the Daily Bible. Some of you may have it, in which he has done just that. He sort of merged them all together, and there is some use in all of that, I'm sure. Well, if you try anything like that, you come to this section. I'm digressing, I don't mean to do that. You come to this section and you find that there's quite a considerable amount of material which is found only in Luke's gospel. There are relatively few miracles in this section, compared at least with the previous section, and the emphasis is very much upon teaching and upon a growing rift between Jesus and the religious leaders of the Jews. That's certainly very evident early on, at least. There's also something of a thematic shift from activities centered in Galilee to a singular focus on Jerusalem as the ultimate destination. Indeed, the goal of this central section is consistently Jerusalem. That is ultimately seen as the goal of his mission. That's a central part of the message that Luke is wanting to convey to us. I think we've probably already noticed that's right. I'm not sure which is a good point, but if we've made a good point, then I'm very happy with that. Okay. Hopefully we'll make another one before the evening is out. Jerusalem plays a critical role for Luke, as indicated by the fact that around 2/3 of the 140 or so references to Jerusalem in the New Testament scriptures, around 2/3 appear in the writings of Luke. Did you know that? If not, you do now. There were, as Edwards makes clear in his Gospel according to Luke, there we go. James Edwards, he wrote the commentary in the Pillar New Testament commentary series. He says there were, of course, several important cities in Palestine in addition to Jerusalem in Jesus' day, including Sepphoris, Tiberias, Sebas, Jerash, Caesarea Maritima. Nearly all were in regions visited by Jesus. Many of them are mentioned in the New Testament, especially in Acts, but no gospel reports that Jesus visited any of these cities. That is, any of these cities in addition to Jerusalem. And that's interesting, perhaps. I think it is anyway. And we'll maybe say a little more of Jerusalem in a few moments, for the final section is that of the Jerusalem narrative, or Jerusalem narratives, if you like. We'll certainly say more of this in later sessions, and this section contains the arrival of Jesus in Jerusalem, teaching in the temple, the arrest, the trials, crucifixion, burial, resurrection, and ultimately, of course, the ascension. And I think, did I include? Yep, there we go. So that's kind of a graphic view of what I understand as the main sections within this book. So, yeah, we've come to the end of that Galilean narrative. We're now embarking upon this central section. And as we have already suggested, this central section includes chapter 951 through to chapter 18 and verse 30. Some might want to, draw it on a little further, but it begins with this statement that when the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. And that, I think, is a really rather key phrase, because from here on, things are going to change. Luke's gospel, as I think was mentioned by someone a little earlier. Lee, did you mention that there we go. Yes, I think so. Luke's gospel both begins and ends in the city of Jerusalem. In fact, actually begins and ends there within the temple in one way or another. And this must be intentional. You may recall how that his second volume, the book of Acts, which Lord willing, we will look at a little later this year, his second volume begins here in Jerusalem, but it ends far away in the city of Rome, the capital of the so-called civilized world. So there you have it. And that's all very, very deliberate. Jesus is clearly on a journey, and it is a journey upon which he has been sent. He is on a mission, and this mission is expressed in two very distinct ways through this section. Now, there's a part of me that would dearly like to say a lot more about that idea of the mission of Christ as revealed within the Gospel of Luke, and there is a lot more that could be said about that, but I am going to resist at this stage and pick up on at least an aspect of this mission, which is expressed in these two distinct ways. Firstly, Jesus must go to Jerusalem. This was first made clear, you may remember, when Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory, spoke of his departure or his exodus, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. So there at that, well, it was a summit meeting, wasn't it? It was a meeting on a summit. So it was a true summit meeting there that Jesus has with Moses and Elijah. I mean, I don't know, there's something, did I hear something about a G something or other meeting going on somewhere or other, and all these, that's nothing compared to this, original summit. Well, this maybe wasn't the original summit meeting, but the summit meeting that was held there just, last week, wasn't it? I mean, as far as our studies are concerned, when, again, sometimes Jesus is there with Moses and Elijah, and what they're talking about has to be significant. And what are they talking about? They're talking about the exodus of Jesus, which he's about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Do not lose sight of the significance of all of this. And the second way in which the mission of Jesus is going to be expressed here is that he must suffer and die. First, you may recall, predicted following Peter's confession, when Jesus said that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised. Well, that was the first time just a little while ago when Jesus had made that known. And again, and I've said this before, and I'm afraid I might even say it again, we must remember as we read through this unfolding series of events, that those of whom we read, they hadn't read to the end of the book. And so they didn't know what we know today. And they were still trying to make sense of it. So let's briefly see how these two threads, the he must go to Jerusalem and the he must suffer and die, how they develop, so that we can be looking out for them as we continue to read over the next few weeks. Okay, he must go to Jerusalem. So I'm going to basically, well, not basically, I'm going to do this. I'm going to literally, I can say, put up on the screen a few texts where we find this being spoken of most specifically. When the days drew near for him to be taken up, that's the passage we've already looked. He set his face to go to Jerusalem. That's where it begins. Just a couple of sentences further on, the people didn't receive him. We'll come to that in a little moment, because his face was set toward Jerusalem. So this is a very deliberate aspect of his mission. He went on his way, Luke tells us in chapter 13 and verse 22, he went on his way through towns and villages, teaching and journeying toward Jerusalem. Then a little later, nevertheless, he says, I must go on my way today and tomorrow and the day following, for it cannot be that a prophet should perish away from Jerusalem. So there's a little hint there of what is to happen in Jerusalem. We've already seen that Jesus has made that more clearly known, and he will continue to do so. But Jerusalem remains the target. And on the way to Jerusalem, he was passing along between Samaria and Galilee. In fact, that's the place I think we mentioned just a few moments ago. That is where Jesus seems to finally leave Galilee and make his way directly to Jerusalem. So that's the first aspect of the mission, as it were, the first thread that we will trace flowing through this central narrative. The other is that he must suffer and die. Let these words sink into your ears, Jesus will, made known, didn't he, just a little while ago? Let these words sink into your ears. The Son of Man is about to be delivered into the hands of men. That was the second time where he makes specific reference to his suffering. Chapter 17, Jesus says how that he must first suffer many things. Speaking of himself here, he must first suffer many things and be rejected by this generation. But it's not until the end of this section that these two threads converge. The Jerusalem narrative thread contains no references to the necessity of Jesus' suffering, and the suffering narrative thread contains no references to Jerusalem. But at the end of this section, as Jesus sits upon the, Jerusalem there is seen sitting upon the horizon, the mission becomes clear. For taking the 12, he said to them, see, we are going up to Jerusalem, and everything that is written about the Son of Man by the prophets will be accomplished, for he'll be delivered over to the Gentiles and will be mocked and shamefully treated and spit upon, and after flogging him, they will kill him. And on the third day, he will rise. And of course, all of that, he now says, that will all be taking place in Jerusalem. So those threads there converge. Still, They didn't understand. They understood none of these things, Luke tells us. This saying was hidden from them, and they did not grasp what was said. So for the 12, for the disciples, for all those who were following Jesus in this way, they really didn't get it. They really didn't understand just what it was that lay, because they hadn't read to the end of the book. Sometimes as we follow Jesus along the way that is his, we might think, if only we knew what laid ahead, if only we knew what was even just around the next corner. But here's the deal: we don't need to know. And it's maybe more often than not better that we don't know, because what matters is that we simply follow him step by step along the way. Well, this new section here begins with us being told that when the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to Jerusalem. He sent messengers ahead of him who went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him. But the people didn't receive him because his face was set toward Jerusalem. And when his disciples, James and John, saw it, they said, "Lord, do you want us to tell fire to come down from heaven and consume them?" But he turned and rebuked them, and they went on to another village. Well, that's an interesting phrase here. The days drew near for him to be taken up. This is the only occurrence of this noun in the New Testament scriptures. Verb forms are available, but it's a semi-technical term within Judaism for being taken up into heaven. And that's surely its meaning here. And it is not insignificant that Luke's first volume ends and his second volume will begin with accounts of his ascension into heaven. It's really rather significant. And so here, as Jesus embarks upon this new leg of the journey, as his mission becomes increasingly focused, Luke begins by saying, when the days drew near for him to be taken up. It's as if his ascension into heaven is clearly seen by Luke as being, well, the icing on the cake, perhaps. The cake which consists of all sorts of, suffering and hardships and persecution and ultimately arrest and trials and death and, of course, resurrection. Well, Luke tells us that the Samaritans didn't receive him because his face was set towards Jerusalem. There is no protracted explanation here, but if we know anything about the Jews and the Samaritans and how that they didn't particularly get on terribly well together, and that's a matter that we'll say a little more of probably next week, yes, we might say, well, it's no wonder they didn't want to receive him because of where he was heading, because his face was set towards Jerusalem. Well, this rejection was met by James and John with a rather ingenious suggestion. And they said, "Lord, do you want us to tell fire to come down and from heaven and consume them?" Oh, what a splendid idea, they must have thought. And I mean, it's almost amusing, isn't it, that they just don't seem to get the idea of well, what Isaiah spoke of, and which the father of John, Zechariah, had spoken of in his benediction as the way of peace, for that is the way of Jesus. And here they are thinking that Jesus might be, I don't know, impressed with their faith, impressed with their zeal. Do you want us to tell fire to come down from heaven? And I mean, I don't know whether you've ever felt that way about people that you've come across. You know, maybe there are people that have crossed you in your life. Maybe there are people who have, you know, rejected you, you know, spat in your face, whether metaphorically or otherwise. I don't know whether you've come across people and you've just wished that a bolt of lightning could be sent from above and sort of wipe them off. I mean, I don't know where you know, I won't ask for hands up if ever you felt that way, but I'm sensing that maybe, you know, more than a few of us might have felt that at times. And I wonder, you know, had they been influenced by their recent meeting with Elijah? I mean, Elijah knew all about that kind of stuff, didn't he? You know, calling fire down from heaven and having, you know, people consumed and what have you. Incidentally, some manuscripts add at the end of that question, some add as also Elijah did. That would provide that sort of link, and there are not many versions, I think, that contain that phrase. I think the authorized version does, but it's almost certainly a marginal note in some, well, not just some, but many manuscripts. And again, there are some, well, many manuscripts that include an additional phrase at the end of verse 55, which again is almost certainly not original, putting into the mouth of Jesus the words, "You do not know what sort of spirit you are of, for the Son of Man did not come to destroy people's lives, but to save them." You might have that either in your text. If you've got an older version, you might find that in some marginal note, but again, maybe even more certainly that the original text did not contain these words. And well, we could pursue that some other time when we're looking at matters of what are known as textual criticism, but this is not the time or place, nor, well, certainly not the time to do this. So let us pursue. I'm going to actually look at, I've just noticed a question down here. I don't always notice them as we go along, but I've noticed this one here, which asks, for Luke to have been a Gentile, he knows a lot about Judaism, and his knowledge of Jewish laws makes me think he was more like, oh, right, okay, yes. Well, I was going to say that there is no certainty that Luke was a Gentile. It is often supposed that he was. In fact, it's often supposed that he came from either Antioch or, you know, or maybe some other place in that vicinity. We really don't know. I will say this, though, that probably a good number of us here this evening know a good deal about Judaism and about the Jewish laws. And yet I suspect that not many, if any of us, have any sort of Jewish heritage. Luke was a you know, a smart chap. You know, he was studious. Not only was he a doctor and had studied in those, but it's very clear that he's put a lot of research into what it is that we are now reading. So being also a travel companion, close companion with the Apostle Paul, formerly known as Saul of Tarsus, one of the leading rabbinical students of his day, I'm quite sure that there's a lot more that Luke knew about Judaism than we ever will. But there we go. Do with all of that as we will. We're going to move on from this bit here, and I'm looking at the time, and the time moves on, as do we. For as they were walking along the road, someone said to him, I will follow you wherever you go. Jesus said to him, you know, foxes have dens, the birds in the sky have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Jesus said to another, follow me. But he replied, Lord, let me first go and bury my father. Jesus said to him, let the dead bury their own dead. But as for you, go and proclaim the kingdom of God. And yet another said, well, I will follow you, Lord, but first let me say goodbye to my family. Jesus said to him, no one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. Well, having now twice spoken of his anticipated suffering and death, and having now faced rejection by some in Samaria, it is essential for his followers to understand the true cost of discipleship. And one lesson that they must have learned by their earlier rebuke is that we don't face, or we don't meet rejection by seeking some kind of revenge, albeit some kind of divine revenge. That's not how we face rejection. We don't encounter hardships by trying to work our way out of them and pursue a life of luxury and comfort and whatever. I understand that there are many in this world who do not like to be offended. But when we make a decision to follow in the steps of Jesus, we are choosing to live a life of offense, to live a life where we will face offense and rejection and persecution and hardships and all the rest of it. Earlier, you may recall, shortly before his conversation with Moses and Elijah, Jesus had said that if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. But I think that's forms part of a, in essence, a question that Stephen had asked at the beginning of the class. Yes, if we're going to follow Jesus, if we're going to follow after him, we need first say no to ourselves and take up our cross daily. And we understand, do we not, just what that means. We spoke of those things just a little while ago. But now Jesus is going to give some practical examples of what this might look like. Luke has recorded here these practical examples of some encounters that Jesus has. And notice the key word here is the word follow. I will follow you, one says. Jesus says to another, follow me. Another says, I will follow you. To follow Jesus is to walk in his ways. That's literally the idea. It's not simply to be a student. It's not simply to study his ways. I mean, it's not simply about coming to Bible classes, you know, whether in person or in some virtual online fashion like this. It's not simply just about learning what his ways are, but it has to be about putting them into practice, about following in his steps. I mean, we've already seen that in a number of ways, haven't we? You know, the lesson, the picture, the illustration that Jesus used about the one who built a house without using foundations. Being like the one who listens to what Jesus said, you know, maybe even memorizes some of what Jesus said, maybe, you know, studies things that Jesus says, but doesn't put them into practice. So to follow Jesus is to do just, you know, what it says on the tin, is to follow him, is to walk in his ways. And so here, when he speaks of foxes and birds, you know, birds in the sky, and you know, they have their place to rest their heads. The Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. To follow Jesus is to accept rejection and hardships, knowing that, you know, this world is not our home. And shortly, and it's going to have to be next week, isn't it? Jesus will be sending out 72 like he sent the 12 out earlier, and they will face rejection. They will face they will face situations that are inhospitable. Inhospitality, that's the word we were looking for, isn't it? Thank you, whoever it is that said that. So he'll face that, and when you face that, well, you'll have nowhere to lay your head, and there will be time. You know, this isn't necessarily a call to poverty and deprivation. You know, we're not being called to sort of self-flagellation or what have you. But such things, if they occur, they're merely incidental to discipleship. That's the way of Jesus. And it was really his way from the very beginning, when we saw that they couldn't, you know, they couldn't even find somewhere particularly suitable to lay him just after he arrived into this world. I mean, this is the nature of the way of Christ. And to follow Jesus is to put the kingdom of God before else. You know, Jesus says to this chap, follow me. And he says, oh, Lord, let me go and bury my father. I mean, you know, that's nice of him to call him Lord, but he doesn't mean it, does he? Because he's only saying it. He's saying, oh, Lord, let me go and do something else. Yeah, well, that's not how it works. So Jesus says, let the dead bury their own dead. But as for you, go and proclaim the kingdom of God. You know, there's no suggestion that this chap's father isn't yet dead, you know, or even that he's just on the verge, but he's not quite, you know, there's no suggestion. Some have suggested that he's simply wanting to wait until his father has died and been buried. But nothing here suggests that to be the case. It's as if, you know, he's about to go and bury his father, and Jesus says, now let the dead bury their own dead. I mean, there's certainly a degree of rhetoric here. I mean, suggesting that the dead bury their own dead is pretty ludicrous, really, isn't it? You know, if you've got a graveyard full of corpses, I mean, they're not going to somehow help each other into the ground. It doesn't work that way, okay? You know, that's not the point. Some have suggested that maybe Jesus is referring to those who are spiritually dead. I think we've got to stretch things a little bit to make that the case. But this is essentially, is it not, similar to the idea that Jesus will later teach that we are to hate those of our own family. Jesus is using a form of hyperbole here in order to illustrate the far greater worth of the kingdom of God. That following Jesus must always take precedence over taking care of our family, even our duties to our family. And of course, we will, want to jump up and down eagerly and say, yes, 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 but to follow Jesus involves taking care of our family. I get that. I understand that. And Jesus isn't in any way undermining that here. But in using hyperbolic language, he's simply saying, do you really understand the overwhelming significance and importance of following me and of the kingdom of God? Well, I'll follow you, Lord, but let me first say goodbye to my family. And Jesus says, no, no one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God. To follow Jesus is to live with this resolute determination. There is to be no turning back. Somebody needs to write a song about that, don't they? There's to be no turning back. My eye has caught another question. I'll come to that at the end. When Jesus said, I've many things to say, but you can't bear them in the last 2,000 years, what new commandment have we received? Okay, let me also come back to that, if I may, at the end there. And so hold tight on that. Definitely will once we've wrapped up this bit. And we're really coming to the end of this here, but this idea of living with a resolute determination of not turning back. Another agricultural picture. I don't know if any of you here have tried putting your hand to a plow. Years ago, I used to work on a small farm. We didn't so much well, the ground was plowed, but that was all that was done with a tractor and what have you. But we did manually have to plant out lettuces. I remember one year we planted over 2 million of the things. It was a pretty large farm, and each one was planted by hand. And we had this machine that we actually did have to look behind us to make sure that we were keeping the straight line. But when you're plowing, this is so terribly important. You've got to keep, it's a little bit like driving a car, isn't it? You generally want to be looking in a forward direction, just in order to, to make sure that you stay between the lines or what have you. And Ken, yes, I'm sorry. I apologize for my sense of humor. I'm well aware of the song. Yes, I've decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, no turn. Excellent. Yes. And this is it. There's no turning back. This Jesus speaks of and we looked at this, didn't we, just a few weeks ago. He tells this story about the chap sowing seed in the field, and the different types of soil on which it falls. There are those that maybe begin to bring forth some growth, but he doesn't use this phrase here, but in essence, they turn back. They take their focus away from the kingdom and they allow themselves to be distracted by all of the things around about, by things that maybe once we had pursued. And Jesus here is saying in a very graphic fashion, don't even turn back to say goodbye to your family. Again, is there some hyperbole here? You know, yes, do we find Jesus having any continued association with his family? Yes, we do. Even at the cross, you know, he's still recognizing his responsibility. But the deal here, again, is that Jesus has absolute priority over every aspect of our lives, even those who are nearest and dearest to us. Jesus must always come first. And if ever one's your loved one is concerned that one loves God more than, you know, one's husband or wife, well, just, you know, set them at peace by assuring them that because you love God more than them, you will love them more than any husband. You get the idea. Okay, so let's wrap this up here, and what we will do here is remind you of what's going on this Thursday. Lord willing, we'll be beginning a new series on Paul's letter to the believers in Colossae, with a session or two at the end looking at his letter to Philemon. And as they say, for now, that's all, folks. Let's